On March 19, 1919, every home in New Orleans received the same chilling letter. It was printed in the morning newspaper. The author claimed to be a demon from hell itself. He promised to visit the city that very night. But he offered one way to survive: play jazz music loud enough for him to hear. And so, on that Tuesday evening, the entire city erupted in jazz. Every bar, every home, every street corner. The music was deafening. Desperate. Because the people of New Orleans knew what happened to those who stayed silent. They had seen the blood. They had counted the bodies. And they knew he was real. This is the story of the Axeman of New Orleans, the serial killer who held an entire city hostage, then vanished without a trace. Welcome to the darkest chapter in New Orleans history. If you're fascinated by unsolved mysteries and want to dive deep into cases that still baffle investigators today, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This is going to be a long one. New Orleans in 1918 was unlike any other American city. While the rest of the country enforced prohibition and Victorian morality, New Orleans thrived on vice. The French Quarter pulsed with jazz music every night. Speakeasies operated openly. The city's Italian immigrant community had transformed entire neighborhoods, bringing their traditions, their families, and yes, their conflicts. But beneath the music and celebration, tension simmered. The Great War was ending. Spanish flu was beginning its deadly march across the globe. And in the immigrant neighborhoods, particularly among Italian grocers and their families, an ancient fear was awakening. The Black Hand, the precursor to the Mafia, had already established operations in New Orleans. Extortion was common. Violence was a business tool. So when the first attacks began, many assumed it was simply more mob activity. They were wrong. What stalked the streets of New Orleans was something far more terrifying than organized crime. It was methodical. It was brutal. And it seemed to have no motive beyond pure terror. Our story begins in the winter months of 1918, in the working-class neighborhoods where Italian immigrants had built their lives. But to understand the horror that was coming, we need to go back even further. Because the Axeman wasn't the first. July 1911. 7 years before the Axeman would terrorize New Orleans, 3 Italian grocers were attacked in their homes in nearly identical fashion. Someone had used a chisel to pry open their back doors in the dead of night. The attacker struck while they slept, using their own axes, taken from their woodsheds. The violence was extreme, the attacks seemingly random. The victims were Italian immigrants, grocers who lived above or behind their shops. All 3 survived barely. But they could tell police nothing useful. The attacks happened in darkness. They woke to blinding pain. Some caught glimpses of a tall figure, a dark shape, nothing more. 3 additional attacks followed over the next few months. 1 victim died. Another lost his memory from the head trauma. The police investigated but found nothing. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no evidence beyond the forced doors and the bloody axes left at the scenes. Then, as suddenly as the attacks began, they stopped. The case went cold. The files gathered dust. New Orleans moved on, and the attacks faded into legend, spoken of in hushed Italian in the grocery stores, a cautionary tale parents told children about locking doors at night. But the killer hadn't left. He had simply been waiting. And when he returned in May of 1918, he was more brutal, more daring, and far more theatrical than before. The question that would haunt investigators then, and still haunts true crime researchers today, is simple. Why did he stop for 7 years? Was he imprisoned for another crime? Did he leave the city? Or was he among them the entire time, living a normal life, fighting some internal battle until the darkness won again? We may never know. But what we do know is this. When he came back, he was ready to turn New Orleans into his personal hunting ground. May 23, 1918. 4:30 in the morning. Andrew Maggio woke to a sound he couldn't quite identify. His brother Joseph and Joseph's wife Catherine lived in the apartment next door, connected by an adjoining door. Andrew listened. Silence. Then he heard it again, a wet, choking sound. He rushed through the connecting door. What he found would scar him for life. Joseph Maggio, age 32, lay in his bed with his throat cut so deeply he was nearly decapitated. The bedsheets were soaked crimson. Catherine, his wife, lay beside him, her skull crushed by repeated axe blows, her throat also slashed. She was still alive, barely, making those terrible choking sounds. She died moments after Andrew found her, unable to speak, unable to identify her killer. Andrew's screams brought neighbors running. Police arrived within minutes to a scene of absolute carnage. Blood covered the walls. The murder weapon, Joseph's own axe, taken from the backyard, lay on the back porch, wiped clean. Near it, a straight razor, also cleaned, also belonging to Joseph. But the most chilling detail was yet to be discovered. The back door had been chiseled open, a panel removed so carefully that it made almost no sound. Whoever did this had worked slowly, methodically, while the Maggios slept just feet away. The same panel technique used in the 1911 attacks. Detective John D'Antoni led the investigation. He was a seasoned investigator who had worked the 1911 cases. The moment he saw the chiseled door panel, he knew. The killer was back. Police scoured the scene. They found something odd. Nothing was stolen. Joseph Maggio kept money in the apartment. Everyone knew Italian immigrants didn't trust banks. The cash sat untouched. Jewelry, valuables, all ignored. This wasn't robbery. This was something else. Then, 2 blocks away, written in chalk on the sidewalk, someone found a message. Mrs. Maggio will sit up tonight just like Mrs. Tony. Police were baffled. Who was Mrs. Tony? The name meant nothing to them. Andrew Maggio became the immediate suspect. Police logic was simple. He was next door, he found the bodies, he had access. They interrogated him for hours. But Andrew had an alibi verified by multiple witnesses. He had been at a card game until 3 a.m., then gone straight home to bed. Dozens of people confirmed it. The murder of the Maggios sent shockwaves through New Orleans' Italian community. Every Italian grocer in the city suddenly felt vulnerable. They were being targeted, that much seemed clear. For what? And by whom? Theories exploded across the city. The Black Hand had returned. German spies were killing Italian immigrants to destabilize the home front during wartime. A madman who hated Italians was on the loose. Voodoo practitioners were using blood rituals. Every theory seemed as plausible and as insane as the next. The police had no leads. No witnesses. No forensic evidence. The killer had been literally feet away from Andrew Maggio, separated by only a thin wall, yet had made no sound. How was that possible? What police didn't know was that this was only the beginning. The Axeman wasn't finished with New Orleans. Not even close. June 28, 1918. Just over a month after the Maggio murders. John Zanka, a baker, was delivering bread at dawn when he heard screaming from 2139 Dorgenois Street. He ran toward the sound. The door was open. Inside, Louis Bessumer's grocery store was dark, but the screaming came from upstairs. Bessumer and his common-law wife, Anna Lowe, had both been attacked in their sleep. Blood was everywhere. Bessumer had been struck multiple times with an axe. Anna Lowe's head had been split open, her skull fractured. Both were alive, conscious, in agony. Police arrived to find the same signature, the back door panel chiseled away, quietly, methodically. The axe from the yard, bloody, left behind. Nothing stolen. But this time, there were witnesses. Sort of. Louis Bessumer survived his injuries. From his hospital bed, he told police conflicting stories. First, he said he saw nothing, woke to pain, found Anna injured. Then he changed his story. He had seen a white man in his bedroom, tall, moving in the shadows. No, wait, it might have been a woman. He wasn't sure. The trauma, the head injury, his memories were fractured. Anna Lowe told a different story. She insisted it was Bessumer himself who attacked her. She claimed he was a German spy, that she had discovered his secrets, that he tried to kill her to keep her silent. She recanted this later, then repeated it again. Her injuries were severe. The doctors weren't sure if her accusations were real memories or products of her damaged brain. The newspapers seized on the spy angle. America was at war. German espionage was a real fear. Was Bessumer a spy? Had Anna discovered something? Or was this the same killer, the same Axeman, striking again? Police investigated Bessumer thoroughly. They found nothing linking him to Germany beyond his surname, which sounded vaguely German. He was actually Polish. He had no motive to kill Anna. Their relationship seemed stable. And the attack method matched the Maggios perfectly. Anna Lowe lingered in the hospital for weeks, her condition deteriorating. She died on August 5, 7 weeks after the attack. Before she died, she made one final statement to police. She had been wrong. Bessumer didn't attack her. Someone else had been in their room. A dark figure. She remembered now. It wasn't her husband. But the damage was done. Bessumer was arrested and charged with her murder. The trial wouldn't happen for over a year, but he sat in jail, a convenient suspect, while the real killer remained free. The very next night after the Bessumer attack, June 29th, another incident occurred. This one was different. This one suggested the Axeman was expanding his territory, changing his pattern, growing bolder. Edward Schneider came home from work at 2 a.m. He was a war veteran working night shifts. His pregnant wife, 8 months along, was home alone. When he opened the door, he found her unconscious on the bed, blood pooling around her head. She had been struck repeatedly with an axe. Same method, chiseled door panel. Same weapon source, backyard axe. Same inexplicable silence. Neighbors heard nothing. But Mrs. Schneider survived. And she gave police the first real description of the attacker. She told investigators she had woken to a dark figure looming over her bed. She said, wearing dark clothing. She couldn't see his face. She tried to scream, but the axe came down. She remembered only shadows and pain. She had crawled to the bathroom, trying to hide, losing consciousness. The attacker had left her for dead. Miraculously, both she and her unborn child survived. She recovered fully. Her baby was born healthy 2 months later. But the terror never left her. She would tell people years later that she still saw that dark figure in her nightmares, still felt the presence in her bedroom. 3 attacks in just over a month. The pattern was clear now. The killer targeted people in their homes, late at night or early morning. He used their own axes. He chiseled through doors with remarkable skill and patience. He made no sound. He left no evidence. And he seemed to kill for the pure pleasure of it. New Orleans was gripping with fear. Hardware stores sold out of locks and bolts. Families moved their beds away from first-floor windows. Italian grocers closed their shops, fled the city, or armed themselves. The police increased patrols, but how do you catch someone who strikes without warning and leaves no trace? Detective D'Antoni was overwhelmed. He had 3 active crime scenes, 1 dead victim, 2 injured survivors with fragmentary memories, and 0 leads. The attacks were clearly connected, but the motive remained invisible. This wasn't mob violence. This wasn't robbery. This was something far more sinister. And then, for a brief moment, the Axeman went quiet. July passed without incident. Early August brought a tense, hopeful quiet to New Orleans. Maybe the killer had left. Maybe he'd been scared off by the increased police presence. Maybe he was done. The city wanted to believe it was over. But those who had studied the 1911 attacks knew better. That killer had stopped for years before returning. What was a few weeks? August 5th. Anna Lowe died from her injuries. The same day, police arrested Louis Bessumer for her murder. The newspapers celebrated. They had their killer. The Axeman was behind bars. But those who understood the evidence knew the truth. Bessumer wasn't the Axeman. He was a convenient scapegoat, a foreign-sounding man. August 10, 1918. 3. Joseph Romano, a respected Italian grocer, woke to the sound of his door being chiseled open. Unlike the previous victims, Romano was a light sleeper. He heard the intrusion. He got out of bed to investigate. He saw a dark figure in his hallway, tall, holding an axe. Romano did what any of us would do. He ran. He fled toward his niece's rooms, trying to warn them, trying to escape. The killer pursued him. The axe came down. Twice. Romano's skull fractured. He collapsed. The killer vanished into the night. Romano's nieces, Pauline and Mary Bruno, ages 18 and 13, woke to their uncle's screams. They found him in the hallway, bleeding, conscious, trying to speak. They called for help. Police arrived within minutes. The back door showed the familiar chiseled panel. The axe, bloodied, lay in the yard. Nothing was stolen. But this time, for the first time, they had witnesses who saw the attacker flee. Pauline Bruno gave police the most detailed description yet. The man was tall, she said. He wore a dark suit and a dark hat. She couldn't see his face. But she noticed something odd. He was heavy-set, but moved with surprising grace. He hadn't run from the house. He had walked calmly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. A neighbor, Mr. Oni, reported seeing a man matching that description walking casually away from the Romano house at 3:15 a.m., just after the attack. The man tipped his hat to Oni as they passed on the street. Oni thought it was odd that anyone would be out at that hour, but the man seemed so normal, so calm, that Oni didn't think to stop him. Police now had their best lead. A description, multiple witnesses, a direction of escape. They canvassed the neighborhood. They interviewed everyone within 10 blocks. They found nothing. Joseph Romano died 2 days later without regaining consciousness. Before he died, he managed to whisper a few words to his nieces, tall man, dark clothes, axe. Nothing they didn't already know. The descriptions circulated citywide. Police arrested several men who matched the general appearance, all released within hours. The problem was simple. The description fit half the adult men in New Orleans. Tall, heavy-set, dark clothes. It could be anyone. The Romano murder shattered the brief calm. The Axeman was definitely still active. And he was getting bolder. Romano had heard him, confronted him, and still been killed. The killer didn't flee when discovered. He pursued his victim. He finished what he started. This suggested something terrifying to investigators. The Axeman wasn't afraid of being caught. He wasn't making mistakes. He was confident, skilled, and utterly ruthless. The newspapers exploded with theories. Some claimed the Axeman was supernatural, a demon or spirit that couldn't be caught by mortal means. Others insisted it was multiple killers, a conspiracy. The spy theory resurfaced. Maybe the Germans were targeting Italian immigrants to create panic. Maybe this was psychological warfare. Detective D'Antoni knew better. This was one man. One incredibly skilled, incredibly patient, incredibly dangerous man. And he was still hunting. The attacks stopped after Romano's death. August passed. September, October, November. The winter months came and went. No new victims. No chiseled doors. No bloody axes. New Orleans began to breathe again. Maybe the Axeman really was gone this time. Maybe Romano had been the last. Maybe the increased police presence, the armed citizens, the nightly patrols had finally scared him off. The newspapers moved on to other stories. The war ended. The flu pandemic raged. The Axeman faded from front pages to inside columns to nothing at all. But on March 13, 1919, everything changed. The editor of the Times-Picayune received a letter. It was handwritten in elaborate, theatrical script. The author claimed to be the Axeman himself. And what he wrote would become one of the most famous documents in true crime history. The letter began, Hell, March 13, 1919. Esteemed mortal of New Orleans, they have never caught me and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman. The writer went on to claim he was an ancient demon who had existed for centuries. He described himself as something beyond human comprehension, a force that killed for pleasure, choosing victims at random according to his own unknowable criteria. But then came the part that would transform New Orleans into something out of a fever dream. Now, to be exact, at 12:15, earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is, I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person shall be spared in whose home a jazz band is in full swing at the time I have just mentioned. If everyone has a jazz band going, well, then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it on Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. The letter was published on March 14th, 4 days before the promised date. New Orleans exploded into frenzied preparation. Jazz musicians found themselves in sudden demand. Every bar, every restaurant, every dance hall booked live bands for Tuesday night. Families who couldn't afford musicians bought records and phonographs. Those who couldn't afford records sang and clapped. The police dismissed the letter as a hoax. Probably written by some pranksters seeking attention, they said. The real Axeman wouldn't announce his attacks in advance. This was just someone taking advantage of the city's fear. But the people of New Orleans weren't taking chances. March 19, 1919. St. Joseph's Night, a major celebration in Italian culture. As the sun set, the music began. By 10 p.m., every block in New Orleans pulsed with jazz. It was deafening. It was desperate. It was unlike anything the city had ever experienced. Bars stayed open all night. Dance halls packed to capacity. In private homes, families gathered around phonographs, playing the same records over and over. Those who had no music played pots and pans, anything to create sound, to fill the silence, to keep the Axeman away. The police patrolled the streets, frustrated, unable to hear anything over the music. If the Axeman struck that night, they might not know until morning. The sun rose on March 20th. The music slowly died down. Exhausted families checked their doors, their windows, their loved ones. And incredibly, there were no attacks. No chiseled doors. No bloody axes. No victims. The city erupted in relief. The music had worked. The Axeman had kept his word. Or maybe he had never existed at all, just a hoax, just a letter from a prankster. But those who knew the case intimately, who understood the pattern, weren't celebrating. They knew something the public didn't. The Axeman always waited. He was patient. He struck when people felt safe, when their guard. August 3, 1919. Nearly 5 months after the letter. Sarah Lawman, age 19, woke in the darkness to find a dark shape standing over her bed. The axe came down before she could scream. She survived, barely, with severe head trauma. Same method, chisel door. Same weapon, yard axe. Nothing stolen. Sarah's survival was miraculous. She gave police the same description: tall, dark clothes, moved silently. She added one new detail that sent chills through investigators. The attacker had stood over her for what felt like minutes before striking. Just watching. Just waiting. This suggested something deeply disturbing. The Axeman wasn't just killing. He was savoring it. He was enjoying the moment before the violence, the power, the fear. September 2nd, 1919. Sarah Lawman was still in the hospital when the Axeman struck again. This time, the attack would be different. This time, he made a mistake. 19-year-old Mike Pepitone was asleep in his bedroom. His wife and 6 children slept in adjoining rooms. At approximately 2 a.m., Mrs. Pepitone woke to a sound. She sat up in bed, listening. Then she heard it, a scream from her husband's room. She ran to the doorway. What she saw would define the rest of her life. A tall, heavy-set man in dark clothing stood over her husband's bed. An axe rose and fell, rose and fell. Blood sprayed the walls. Mike Pepitone never had a chance to defend himself. Mrs. Pepitone screamed. The children woke. The house erupted in chaos. And for the first time in all the attacks, the Axeman panicked. He fled through the house, still holding the bloody axe. Mrs. Pepitone and the children saw him clearly in the lamplight. He ran out the back door, dropping the axe in the yard. Neighbors heard the screams, saw the fleeing figure. Multiple witnesses tracked his escape route for several blocks before losing him in the darkness. Police arrived to find Mike Pepitone dead, his skull crushed beyond recognition. The scene was the bloodiest yet. But for the first time, they had multiple reliable witnesses, detailed descriptions, and a clear escape route. The description solidified: male, 40 to 50 years old, 6 feet tall, heavy-set build, approximately 200 pounds, dark suit and dark hat, dark complexion, possibly Italian or Greek. walked with a slight limp or unusual gait. Several witnesses noted he seemed calm despite fleeing a murder scene, almost casual. Detective D'Antoni felt the first real hope since the attacks began. This was their best lead yet. They had descriptions from multiple witnesses who had seen the attacker clearly, in good light, for extended periods. They could solve this. They were wrong. The manhunt intensified. Police interviewed hundreds of men matching the description. They raided known criminal hangouts. They followed up every tip, every rumor, every whispered accusation. They found nothing. The witnesses couldn't identify anyone in police lineups. When shown photographs of suspects, they hesitated, unsure. The man they had seen seemed so ordinary, so unmemorable despite being seen so clearly. It was as if he had disappeared into the population, becoming invisible again. Mike Pepitone was buried. His family left New Orleans, fleeing the city where their husband and father had been brutally murdered. Mrs. Pepitone told reporters she would never feel safe again, anywhere. And then, as suddenly as he appeared in 1918, the Axeman vanished. September passed. October. November. December. No new attacks. The pattern that had terrorized New Orleans for over a year simply stopped. The Axeman was gone. Over the course of the attacks, police investigated hundreds of potential suspects. Let's examine the most compelling theories. Theory 1. The Black Hand. Many believe the Axeman was connected to organized crime. The Black Hand frequently used extortion and violence in Italian communities. Most victims were Italian grocers, many of whom refused to pay protection money. The theory suggested the Axeman was a mob enforcer, using terror tactics to force compliance. But this theory had major problems. The attacks were too public, too brutal, too risky for organized crime. The mob preferred quiet murders, bodies that disappeared, violence that sent a message to the community without attracting police attention. The Axeman's theatrical violence brought massive police scrutiny. No criminal organization would operate this way. Also, several victims had no connection to the Black Hand. Sarah Lawman wasn't Italian. The Schneiders weren't involved in any business that would attract mob attention. If this was organized crime, the victim selection made no sense. Theory 2. A mafia hitman named Joseph Mumford. This theory emerged dramatically in December 1920, over a year after the last attack. A man named Joseph Mumford was shot to death in Los Angeles by a veiled woman dressed in black. When arrested, she was identified as Mrs. Mike Pepitone, widow of the final Axeman victim. She told police that Mumford had killed her husband. She had tracked him to Los Angeles and executed him for revenge. Mumford had a criminal record including robbery and violence. Some researchers later claimed Mumford had been imprisoned during the 1911 attacks and released just before they started again in 1918, then imprisoned again during the quiet period. This seems to solve everything, right? Except the dates don't match. Records show Mumford's prison time didn't align with the gaps in attacks. Also, Mrs. Pepitone gave no evidence linking Mumford to the murders beyond her accusation. Police investigated but found no connection. She was convicted of murder and served 3 years before being released. Was Mumford the Axeman? Or was Mrs. Pepitone a grieving widow who killed a random criminal she believed responsible? We don't know. Theory 3. A serial killer with sexual motives. Some modern criminal psychologists suggest the Axeman fits the profile of an organized serial killer. The patience, the planning, the escalation, the apparent pleasure in violence, all match known patterns. The letter shows narcissism and a desire for attention. The standing over victims before striking suggests sexual gratification from power and control. This theory explains the lack of robbery, the theatrical elements, the careful selection of vulnerable victims. It also explains why the attack stopped. Perhaps the killer died, was imprisoned for an unrelated crime, or moved to another city and continued killing there. But if this is true, why target Italian grocers specifically? Serial killers typically have a preferred victim type based on opportunity or attraction. The Axeman's victim selection seems too specific to be random, yet too random to be calculated. Theory 4. Multiple killers. Some investigators believed there were multiple killers using similar methods. This would explain the inconsistencies in descriptions, the gaps between attacks, the varying levels of violence. Perhaps the first attacker inspired copycats. Perhaps several criminals were operating independently, and the media combined them into one, Axeman, for simplicity. But the method was too specific, too unusual. The chiseled door panel, the use of the victim's own axe, the early morning timing, the lack of robbery. These details weren't widely publicized at first. How would copycats know to replicate them exactly? Theory 5. Unknown and unknowable. The frustrating truth is that we may never know who the Axeman was. He left no physical evidence in an era before advanced forensics. He was seen by multiple witnesses but never identified. He terrorized an entire city for over a year, then simply vanished. Was he killed? Did he die of natural causes? Did he move elsewhere? Or did he simply stop, satisfied with his reign of terror, content to live out his days knowing he had gotten away with murder? Detective D'Antoni worked the case until his retirement in 1925. He never solved it. He told reporters before his death that the Axeman was the one case that haunted him, the one killer who outsmarted him. He believed the Axeman was still alive somewhere, living a normal life, his dark secret buried forever. The Axeman killed at least 6 people and injured at least 6 more. Some researchers believe there were additional victims, attacks that weren't connected at the time or whose records have been lost. The true body count may never be known. The case remains officially unsolved. The New Orleans Police Department still maintains the files, though they're no longer actively investigated. Every few years, a researcher or journalist claims to have new evidence or a new theory. None have definitively solved the mystery. But the Axeman's legacy extends beyond the unsolved murders. He changed New Orleans permanently. The Axeman's letter, demanding jazz music, has become part of New Orleans folklore. Every March 19th, some bars and clubs hold Axeman parties, playing jazz all night in tribute to that terrifying evening in 1919 when an entire city played music to keep a killer at bay. It's been romanticized, turned into legend, stripped of its original terror. But for those who lived through it, there was nothing romantic about the Axeman. He represented something primal and terrifying. The killer who could enter your home, who could murder you in your sleep, who could disappear without a trace. He proved that even in a city of 500,000 people, with hundreds of police officers, a single man could create absolute terror and never be caught. The questions that remain are haunting. Why did he target Italian grocers primarily but not exclusively? Was this personal vendetta, ethnic hatred, or simply opportunity? Italian grocers often lived above their shops, isolated, vulnerable. Were they chosen for practical reasons or deeper motives? Why did he stop? The most common theory is that he died or was imprisoned for an unrelated crime. But what if he simply satisfied whatever dark urge drove him? What if he achieved what he wanted? To prove he could kill with impunity, to terrorize an entire city, to become immortal through infamy. Was the letter genuine? It's one of the most debated pieces of evidence. The tone is theatrical, almost mocking. Some believe it was written by the killer, a narcissist who couldn't resist engaging with his audience. Others believe it was a hoax, someone taking advantage of the city's fear. We'll never know for certain. Could he have been caught with modern technology? DNA evidence, security cameras, forensic analysis, modern investigative techniques would almost certainly have identified the Axeman. But in 1918, police had nothing but eyewitness testimony and physical evidence that the killer was careful not to leave. He was simply operating in the right era for his crimes, a time when a careful, patient killer could literally get away with murder. The Axeman case shares similarities with other notorious unsolved serial killer cases. Like Jack the Ripper, he struck vulnerable victims in a concentrated area, then vanished. Like the Zodiac Killer, he sent theatrical letters to newspapers, taunting authorities. Like B, he seemed to be an ordinary person living an ordinary life while harboring extraordinary darkness. But the Axeman was unique in one crucial way. He controlled an entire city through fear. The jazz music night of March 19, 1919, remains unprecedented in American history. No other serial killer has ever compelled an entire metropolitan area to change its behavior en masse, to participate in a bizarre ritual demanded by the killer himself. Modern criminal profilers have attempted to create a psychological profile of the Axeman based on his behavior. The consensus suggests a white male, likely aged 30 to 50 during the attacks. Physically strong and athletic, despite being described as heavy-set. Highly intelligent with meticulous planning skills. Someone with knowledge of carpentry or similar trades, given his skill with the chisel. Possibly living alone or with a spouse who worked nights or was absent frequently. No close friends or family who would notice odd behavior or unexplained absences. He likely held a regular job, possibly in manual labor or construction. He would have seemed completely normal to neighbors and coworkers. He probably had a fascination with true crime or violence, perhaps collecting newspaper clippings about his own crimes. He felt superior to police and enjoyed outsmarting them. The letter suggests narcissism and a need for recognition. He wanted credit for his work, wanted to be feared and remembered. The theatrical, demon from hell, persona indicates someone who saw himself as special, beyond human law and morality. But this is speculation. Without knowing who he was, we can never truly understand his psychology. Before we conclude, it's important to remember that this isn't just an unsolved mystery or a fascinating historical puzzle. Real people died. Real families were destroyed. The Axeman's victims deserve to be remembered as more than just names in a case file. Joseph and Catherine Maggio ran a small grocery store and were known for their generosity to neighborhood children. They had no children of their own but treated their nieces and nephews as if they were. Joseph was saving money to expand the business. Catherine was known for making the best marinara sauce in the neighborhood. They were building a life together. That life was stolen. Louis Bessumer survived his attack but spent over a year in jail accused of murdering Anna Lowe. He was eventually acquitted, but his life was ruined. His business was destroyed. He left New Orleans a broken man and died in poverty years later, his name forever associated with a crime he didn't commit. Anna Lowe was a complicated person with a difficult past, but she didn't deserve to die with her skull crushed, spending her final weeks in delirium, making accusations she would later recant. Her final moments of clarity, when she told police Bessumer was innocent, came too late to save either of them. Mrs. Edward Schneider survived but lived with trauma for the rest of her life. She and her husband eventually left New Orleans, unable to live in the city where she had nearly been murdered. Her son, born 2 months after the attack, grew up knowing his mother had been attacked while pregnant with him. That knowledge shaped his entire life. Joseph Romano was a respected member of his community, known for his honesty in business and his devotion to his extended family. His nieces who witnessed his murder were traumatized for life. They never married, never left New Orleans, living together until their deaths in the 1960s. They rarely spoke about that night, but neighbors said they always slept with lights on. Sarah Lawman recovered physically but struggled emotionally. She moved away from New Orleans at age 20, seeking to escape the memory of waking to a stranger standing over her bed. She told her children, decades later, that she never felt truly safe sleeping again. Mike Pepitone left behind a wife and 6 children. His youngest daughter was 3 years old when he was murdered. She would have no memory of her father beyond what others told her. His widow, whether or not Joseph Mumford was the actual killer, believed strongly enough in his guilt to commit murder herself. She spent 3 years in prison, leaving her children orphaned in all but name. These were real people with real lives, real dreams, real families. The Axeman took all of that away. And because he was never caught, their families never got justice, never got closure, never got answers. That might be the most tragic aspect of this case. The victims' families lived the rest of their lives knowing that somewhere, the man who murdered their loved ones was walking free. Perhaps he passed them on the street. Perhaps he shopped in their stores. Perhaps he lived next door. They would never know. So what happened to the Axeman? We simply don't know. He killed at least 6 people, terrified an entire city, wrote one of the most bizarre letters in criminal history, then disappeared forever. His identity remains one of the great unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. Was he Joseph Mumford, killed by a victim's widow seeking revenge? Was he a member of the Black Hand who took his criminal career too far? Was he a serial killer who died or moved to another city? Was he an ordinary person who fought his demons into submission and lived out his days in quiet anonymity? The answer is lost to time. The evidence is cold. The witnesses are all dead. The case will almost certainly never be solved. But the Axeman's legacy lives on. In the jazz music that still fills New Orleans every night. In the double-locked doors and security systems that seem so normal now but were revolutionary then. In the true crime community that continues to investigate, theorize, and debate. In the chilling reminder that some monsters are never caught, some crimes are never solved, and some mysteries endure forever. On March 19, 1919, an entire city played jazz music to keep a killer away. It worked or seemed to, but the question remains. Did the music actually stop him, or had he already decided not to kill that night? Was he honoring his bizarre promise, or was the letter simply a cruel joke, a way to make the city dance like puppets while he watched and laughed? We'll never know. And perhaps that's exactly what the Axeman wanted. To remain forever mysterious, forever feared, forever the demon from hell who came to New Orleans and was never caught. What do you think happened to the Axeman? Do you believe Joseph Mumford was the killer? Do you think he was supernatural, as he claimed in his letter, or simply a man who understood how to manipulate fear? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you want more deep dives into unsolved mysteries like this, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Check out my video on Related Case, where I cover another serial killer who was never caught. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching. This was a long one, but the story of the Axeman demanded it. Until next time, stay safe, lock your doors, and maybe play some jazz music tonight just in case.